Is Kremlin infighting spilling into the public? Is the Wagner Group exhausted in Bakhmut? And is Russia going to have to dig deeper to find the manpower and logistics that it needs? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 18th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the control map. Biggest news right here. No major updates. This is kind of a surprise, given that we've actually seen 2 straight days where Russian forces appear unable to sustain a push into Bakhmut. And while you may be thinking that they are preparing for another push, this is almost certainly correct. You have to remember that Ukrainian forces who have been on the back foot now have an opportunity to dig in, establish defensive positions, improve their defensive posture, rotate in fresh troops, reinforce likely avenues of advance, and in the aggregate math, generally, as a rule, time favors the defender because while the person who needs to reassume offensive operations, they have to break camp, become mobile again, and push into enemy formations. The enemy is already in, more or less, their set formations. In this case, the Ukrainians, they're in place. They just need to make this place better. The Russians, of course, need to force Ukrainians out of their lines. So this is a tall order, and generally, this sort of thing favors offensive efforts. Now, again, the pressure is still considerable on Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, and I would not call this over yet by a long shot. When we look at the combat map, though, you can see visually just how reduced the operational tempo is, right? We look down in the Donetsk city region, and you guys can see that this is pretty light. Now, the number they're listing is 100 for this 24-hour period. And then up here in Bakhmut, you can see just how little offensive action is really being taken. One attack in the city and Ivansky, and that's pretty much it. And then Klitschivka. Nothing reported to be happening in the northern half of the front lines, and nothing happening in Volodar, which itself is very, very interesting. Again, Russian forces rarely pause for 2 days back to back like this, or reduce tempo unless absolutely necessary. So this is definitely an interesting look. When we look at the UK Ministry of Defense intelligence brief, they actually make some interesting points. First off, Russia reaching deeper into its pool of manpower, raising the bracket for conscription from 21 to 30 years, up from the current 18 to 27. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. First off, because Russia has a mandatory military service, a conscription cycle that happens twice a year, and the partial mobilization that happened was not of, well, it wasn't supposed to be of conscripts. I think officially it was of veterans who had completed their conscription service and were ostensibly in the reserves. Russia officially says recently mobilized conscripts can't go to Ukraine, but it says hundreds are probably serving through either administrative mix-ups or after being coerced to sign contracts. And we've heard this from some of the leaked phone calls about soldiers feeling that these contracts that they signed were coercive or done by force. So this number, hundreds, I suspect it's probably higher than that. But they said many 18 to 21-year-old men currently claim draft exemption due to higher education. And the authorities are likely trying to scoop up that population that delays conscription through by simply waiting out the age by continually being in school. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Yes, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and Russian Commissioner on Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. Oh my God, that's actually her name. And the war crime is allegedly for deporting Ukrainian children to Russia. This is, of course, part of a Russian long-term strategy to make Ukraine more Russified, aligned with Russian culture and language. And they feel that ultimately being able to do that, to drive Ukrainians out of these regions and replace them with ethnic or linguistic Russians, is going to, in the long term, align Eastern Ukraine with Russian interests. So, of course, re-educating Ukrainian children in Russia is both monstrous and serves their ultimate objective, which is, of course, being able to occupy the region and have the region be occupied by pro-Russians. International Criminal Court, though, is... I'm not going to say it doesn't have jurisdiction. It has the ability to try and sentence someone to prison sentences, but generally, this is almost never done against sitting sovereign rulers. It's almost always done against, either done in absentia against criminals they will never ever see, that will never be in the court, or it's done against lower level authority figures, warlords, and people who don't have the protection of a nation state. So this is largely symbolic. There's no way Putin will ever be made to sit in the International Criminal Court. I won't say you'll never see this Maria Lvova-Belova in here, but it's also almost certainly impossible. Trust me, if it were possible to get people, if Russian protection from international authority was second rate, Snowden would be back in the United States by now. But the fact is, the guy has been in Russia for many years and is unable to be touched, as far as we can tell, by any Western intelligence agency. Now, here's where things get weirder. Recently, a Russian outlet claimed, or rather, Russian Wagner Group financier Evgeny Prigozhin claimed he had received a press request. Now, he didn't ask this question. A member of the press did, concerning a rumored plot by Putin himself and Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev against him. Now, it's not him. Now, he wants you to be clear. It's not him accusing Putin of trying to assassinate him, but this is a level of direct. But he's saying that just a press outlet asked him this question, and what was his answer? Hopefully you can sense the sarcasm here. This is sort of probing the waters. Prigozhin is almost certainly doing here, to see how strongly Putin reacts to this sort of threat to his power. And he's also probably gauging other actors in his orbit, other oligarchs' responses to this prospect, and how they respond to the prospect of a Prigozhin versus Putin and his establishment lackey, how they're going to align in a potential coup attempt, is my theory. And obviously, the outlet itself is like, we never said this. Please don't accuse us of this, because, again, this level of side taking, this level of opposition is pretty unheard of, right? Putin is almost always protected reputationally in public. So to see this come out publicly by Prigozhin is really, really pretty wild. Right? He has no problem criticizing the Russian Ministry of Defense, but it's criticizing them for not serving the Russian state and therefore Putin sufficiently. There's never been any sort of wavering loyalty by Prigozhin vis-a-vis Putin. But now there is, right? Prigozhin likely promoted the Atej plot to support informational campaigns against the Russian military establishment. This is more than that. This is the big dog that he's says is conspiring against him. Prigozhin may have fabricated the plot to support these information campaigns, but there wasn't a Russian mill blogger who even talked about these rumors. Putin's press service did something similar in the past, but he may not have fabricated the rumor himself. so it's tough to say. There's a lot of layers to intrigue behind these sort of Kremlin events. And reading, sometimes you can look at these sort of rumors and try to read too much into them. Look for more than there really is. But it's pretty worrying, right? Pretty exceptional to see this level of confrontation. Two final notes. It sounds like Belarus and, more importantly, Chinese President Xi Jinping He's going to be meeting with Putin during a state visit to Russia in the next 2 days to talk about sanction evasion schemes, Chinese interest in mediating a negotiated settlement to the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin stated Putin and Xi are going to sign unspecified bilateral documents, discuss topical issues in Russia and China's comprehensive partnership. This is in the context of Chinese companies being outed, selling military-esque rifles, drone parts, and equipment to Russian entities that could easily be repurposed for military use. Chinese leadership is considering provision of additional lethal equipment to Russia, though aiding Russia is almost certainly at odds with their goal of mediating a negotiated settlement for Ukraine. And the reason they have such a strong interest in this is that China aspires to be a great power. And part of being a great power is using your great power influence to be able to shape world events. And on the world stage, China being seen as bringing one of the largest and most dire conflicts in the world by getting both sides together, making them shake hands, giving them an agreement, a lasting peace, is going to be a huge diplomatic feather in their cap. Again, you have to think that in things like the conflict in Bosnia, they were ended with the Dayton Accords, signed literally in Dayton, Ohio. So for China to sit there and say, for the rest of history, the conflict in Ukraine was ended with the Szechuan Accords or whatever, that would be just a massive geopolitical win and a sign of China's rising diplomatic capabilities. That said, it's not clear that China's actually up to the fight. You don't usually see these sort of complex diplomatic agreements come out of China. They're usually fairly one-sided. They don't have the sort of complexities and oftentimes resources, right? A lot of these deals, these peace deals, are resource intensive. So it might involve, Chinese peacekeepers being deployed, indefinitely. I mean, look at Kosovo. There's been for decades a military presence in Kosovo as part of these peace accords. So China, needs to have the prestige and power projection to do this sort of thing. It's a tall order, and I don't think China's up to it. China's not really even up to, being able to copy existing COVID vaccines. They're definitely not going to be up for major geopolitical commitments like this. So anyway, guys, the other thing I wanted to talk about is, of course, combatvetnews.com. That you guys know I've been canceled on Patreon. Patreon booted me off. They said they're tired of Ukraine war content. They don't want me doing it. So I have launched my own site, combatvetnews.com, and it is basically a Patreon. It's more than just a Patreon clone, right? Yes, it has the membership tiers. It has exclusive members only content. I'm dropping new uncensored combat videos every single day. This week in order to fill up the backlog because Patreon took all my old content. But more importantly, you can view all of my YouTube videos right here on the homepage. And I'm going to start adding things like a news section, and so you can get all your national security news in one place. So the vision is big. The link is in the description. If you can support me, it would be huge in keeping me able to do what I do. Thanks so much, as always. In the next couple of days, we're going to get all the lieutenant tier and all the colonel tier patrons their thank you screen up. But I appreciate you guys, and I will see you in the next one.